Welcome to the Practical NLP podcast with me, Andy Smith. This week, another big part of the Milton Model, embedded and indirect suggestions. The first pattern in today's podcast is one of the most useful ones for influence and for getting people to do what you want them to do. With embedded suggestions, you can embed a word or phrase within the longer sentence that your listener's conscious mind hears in such a way that the unconscious mind hears the embedded suggestion, even if the conscious mind doesn't. Now actually, because you're learning these patterns, I want you to notice embedded suggestions consciously as well. Milton Erickson used to subtly mark out the embedded suggestions with a change of tone, or by pausing before each one, or with a significant look or an emphasizing gesture, or where it's appropriate you could do it with a touch. This is called analog marking. You mark out the words of the suggestions, which of course are in the auditory digital modality, with a change in another channel, auditory tonal for pauses or changes of tone, visual for a look or a gesture, and kinesthetic if you were to use a touch. You'll remember that we already used analog marking with the swish noise in the swish pattern a few podcasts ago. Now when you listen to these audios more than once, you'll hear me use all kinds of embedded suggestions, including ones I'm not consciously aware of. My unconscious mind has been doing this for so long it can just generate embedded suggestions easily. Let's flag up some explicit examples of embedded suggestions. I don't know how soon you'll begin to feel better. When you're ready to go ahead, perhaps you can give me a call. What factors tell you when it's time to buy? There's a subset of embedded suggestions called conversational postulates, or rhetorical questions in everyday English, where the suggestion or command is embedded in a yes-no question. Are you able to give me that order now? Are you ready to let me on the computer? Technically, these are questions about their ability or readiness, and you would ask them when you know the answer is yes. But really you're asking for the order or for access to the computer. I'm sure you can see that it's easy to embed suggestions in everyday conversation in such a way that you still make sense to the conscious mind overall. My advice would be to underdo it rather than overdo it. Even if you didn't emphasize the suggestions at all, the unconscious mind is still processing them, and you don't want to set off alarm bells with the conscious mind by appearing to speak oddly. Now, with the last few examples, like what factors tell you when it's time to buy, the form of the words is a question, but I've marked out it's time to buy with a slight command tonality. My voice goes down at the end of the phrase, which turns it into a command. So it's worth mentioning three types of intonation. Where the voice goes up at the end of the phrase, in English, that traditionally indicates a question. Where the voice stays level, that indicates a statement. And where the voice goes down, that indicates a command. You understand this? You understand this? You understand this. The rising intonation is a form of analog marker that tells the listener's unconscious mind to pay attention, this is a question. The downward intonation is another analog marker that says, pay attention, this is a command. There are actually two ways in English that you can tell whether what someone is saying is a question or not. One is that rising intonation, and the other is the syntax or word order. The most common question syntax, as you know, goes like this. Would you like to include the optional extras? Or, are you ready to try this out? You put a question at the front, would you like to, or are you ready to, and follow it with the fact or action that you're inquiring about. So when you use the question syntax with a command tonality, that can be a powerful way of influencing people. Consciously, the word order tells them that they're hearing a question, but their unconscious mind also picks up on the command. Would you like to include the optional extras? Or, are you ready to try this out? Yes, they're conversational postulates. Just a caveat about the high rising terminal, as the rising intonation is called. This is increasingly used by young people in the UK and US, and particularly in Australia, for statements and even commands, as well as questions. If you find yourself using it a lot, You need to be aware that it also makes you sound uncertain and lacking authority in certain situations. For example, in presentations and when you actually do want someone to do something. I'd like you to notice what tonalities other people and yourself habitually use. I'd also like you to experiment with using subtle command tonalities with embedded suggestions and notice what effect it has on people. The next pattern is the extended quote. I learned about this pattern from my first teacher of NLP, who told me about the impact it had on her when she first heard it from Tad James in California at the beginning of the 90s. Tad was telling his class a story about when he was apprenticed to Richard Bandler. Richard told him that he was teaching a class in California 15 years ago, and one of the students told him that Milton Erickson could just say to someone, "Allow your unconscious mind to give you whatever you most need right now, because your unconscious mind has all the resources you will ever need." And it would. Now, there's a lot going on in that pattern. Firstly, who is speaking here? On one level, it's me telling you this, but I'm also reporting what my teacher said, and she's talking about a story that Tad told, and he's telling a story about Richard Bandler. And within that is a story that Bandler's telling about his class in Denver, and within that is the student's story about Milton Erickson. That's quite a few layers, and so it's easy for the listener to lose track of who's speaking. And of course, whatever the unconscious mind hears, it applies to itself. By the way, this is one reason why people who insult and slag off others are usually pretty unhappy themselves. Every time they call someone a bitch or an idiot, their unconscious mind is taking it on board as applying to self. So although this is Milton Erickson saying, "Your unconscious mind has all the resources you need," to an unspecified person in a story, the listener's unconscious mind also applies that suggestion or statement to itself. Plus, the listener might not accept that suggestion just from me, but when the person in the story is someone they admire or respect, they're more likely to just take it on board. I heard Richard Branson speak about business decisions once, and he said that when he's decided the time is right, he'll just say, "Screw it, let's do it." Just to step outside of NLP for a moment, that's Professor Cialdini's authority principle in action. Cialdini's not an NLP guy, although he's spoken at NLP conferences. He's an academic psychologist who specializes in studying what works in influencing human beings, and especially the little psychological triggers that temporarily turn off our critical faculties and get us to accept things automatically. That's what's going on when you get to the science bit in an advert for cosmetics or shampoo. Scientists have come up with this, or it's endorsed by the British Skin Council, whoever they are, so it must work. Another of Cialdini's principles of influence is called social proof. This is the idea that you're more likely to buy something or do something when you see other people doing it. It's why you see testimonials for products or services on people's websites. When you use extended quotes in a business context, rather than as Erickson used them where his aim was to trance people through the floor, they don't need to be that extended. Something as simple as, "One of our customers told me that their costs had reduced 30% in the 3 weeks since they installed the system," backs up your offer with a message from someone else. It's not you saying that, it's this other customer. That's it for this week's podcast. In the meantime, move that bit closer to a golden future by visiting nlpwebstore.com and grabbing the free downloads, or subscribe to the Coaching Leaders newsletter at coachingleaders.co.uk. See you next time.